David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Last night was night 3 of the Democratic National Convention, and former President Barack Obama gave what was, by all reasonable assessments, a very solid DNC speech in support of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and very strongly going after Donald Trump. And Barack Obama, I mean, listen, you don't have to think he was the best president. You don't have to think that Joe Biden's the best candidate, but Barack Obama did not show up with kid gloves in criticizing Donald Trump. You're going to see clips in a moment, but Donald Trump, within minutes, if not seconds, of Barack Obama's speech starting, was completely and instantly triggered, starting to send out outrageous tweets in all caps, more the behavior of a child, really, than an adult, never mind an adult who happens to be the president of the United States. You can imagine the scene, Trump sitting at the White House. Obama comes up on his screen and starts dismantling Donald Trump, pointing out his failings and his fundamental lack of capacity for the job, piece by piece by piece. Trump grabs his phone, turns on caps lock, as so many Trumpists often do when it's time to tweet, and then tweets, "He spied on my campaign and got caught," referring, I guess, to the supposed biggest political crime in history, which I can't even say it with a straight face, which we still haven't gotten the details of or been able to identify. And then just moments thereafter, as Barack Obama continues speaking in full sentences and putting together coherent thoughts, which is a very unusual thing from a president at this point in time, Trump tweets again with caps lock still engaged. Why did he refuse to endorse Slow Joe until it was all over, and even then was very late? Why did he try to get him not to run? So the second part, why did Obama try to convince Joe not to run? That's BS. But the reason Barack Obama decided not to endorse Joe Biden or anybody during the primary was the calculation, and arguably it's a politically astute calculation, that if Barack Obama gets involved in the primary and then whoever he supports doesn't end up being the nominee, it could end up being divisive, and it could end up hurting Barack Obama's ability to then endorse and campaign for the eventual nominee. It's a political calculation. You can disagree with it or not, but that's all it is. Barack Obama's priority was and is to defeat Donald Trump, and Barack Obama made the call. He's a better player in that cause by staying out of the primary and getting involved in support of the eventual nominee, which is what he did. There's really nothing controversial there. But if you want to go in that direction, we should ask the question, why hasn't George W. Bush gotten involved at all in helping Donald Trump get reelected? And of course, George W. Bush is not supporting Trump in the sense of publicly, as we've heard in a statement from a staffer of George W. Bush's, and certainly is not helping Donald Trump get reelected. What about that? That is a question that should be asked. Now, Barack Obama's speech was followed during night 3 of the DNC by vice presidential pick Kamala Harris, Democratic senator from California, and Donald Trump also triggered by her and tweeting erratically, still with the caps lock engaged, saying, quote, "But didn't she call him a racist?" referring to Kamala and Joe Biden. "Didn't she say he was incompetent?" Some clips from Barack Obama's speech that went right after Donald Trump. This is probably part of the moment that most triggered Donald Trump.
Donald Trump hasn't grown into the job because he can't. And the consequences of that failure are severe. 170,000 Americans dead. Millions of jobs gone, while those at the top take in more than ever. Our worst impulses unleashed, our proud reputation around the world badly diminished, and our democratic institutions threatened like never before.
Obama treating Trump almost like a little kid saying, I had hopes that he would take the job. It's like the hopes were so pathetically low. People were hoping Trump would take the job seriously, and he didn't. People were hoping Trump would grow into the job, and he didn't. And then Barack Obama continuing.
I never expected that my successor would embrace my vision or continue my policies. I did hope, for the sake of our country, that Donald Trump might show some interest in taking the job seriously, that he might come to feel the weight of the office and discover some reverence for the democracy that had been placed in his care. But he never did. For close to 4 years now, he has shown no interest in putting in the work, no interest in finding common ground, no interest in using the awesome power of his office to help anyone but himself and his friends.
Also going after the Trump administration on the basis of their playing very fast and loose with democracy.
Work will continue long after this election. But any chance of success depends entirely on the outcome of this election. This administration has shown it will tear our democracy down if that's what it takes for them to win. So we have to get busy building it up by pouring all our efforts into these 76 days.
So overall, Barack Obama's speech was fine. It emphasized Donald Trump's failings and the Constitution, the weight of the office of the presidency and the responsibility that comes with it. I think it was a good speech. I actually think Michelle Obama's speech on Monday night resonated more in terms of sort of lighting a fire about the acute nature of this situation, the emergency of a total deficit of morality and decency and empathy in the White House. So in a sense, certainly Barack Obama, a master orator, Michelle Obama, also a great speaker. But I actually thought that overall, maybe Michelle Obama's speech was better suited for communicating the urgency of the situation. Although, listen, I miss hearing complete sentences from a president. We heard complete sentences from Barack Obama. This is how low the bar is. I miss hearing coherent thoughts expressed in those complete sentences. And we heard some from Barack Obama. And, we're really talking about details now. Now, last thing about the Obama speech. Barack Obama mentioned that even when the democratic system appears not to work, our ancestors, our predecessors, maybe better said, still managed to use those arguably flawed systems successfully to effect change. This didn't get a lot of attention from the speech. It is so poignant right now. So I want to play. This is about 90 seconds from Barack Obama's speech. Listen very closely to what he says here. I think this is really crucial.
What we do echoes through generations. Whatever our backgrounds, we are all the children of Americans who fought the good fight. Great-grandparents working in fire traps and sweatshops without rights or representation. Farmers losing their dreams to dust. Irish and Italians and Asians and Latinos told, go back where you come from. Jews and Catholics, Muslims and Sikhs made to feel suspect for the way they worshiped. Black Americans chained and whipped and hanged, spit on for trying to sit at lunch counters, beaten for trying to vote. If anyone had a right to believe that this democracy did not work and could not work, it was those Americans, our ancestors. They were on the receiving end of a democracy that had fallen short all their lives. They knew how far the daily reality of America strayed from the myth. And yet, instead of giving up, they joined together. And they said, somehow, some way, we are going to make this work. We are going to bring those words in our founding documents to life.
This is so key right now because we are trying to fix a problem with a system that we don't have huge confidence in. Postal service, voter suppression, reducing early voting, all the stuff we've been covering. And we're saying we have a real problem that we've got to fix, but part of the problem needs to be fixed with a system that is part of what needs repair as well. Will a broken system allow us to actually fix it? And Barack Obama very poignantly says, presciently says, if anyone had a right to believe that this democracy didn't work and could not work, it was our ancestors, those Americans who were on the receiving end of a democracy that fell short. And he said, they knew how far the daily reality of America strayed from the myth of America, and they didn't give up. They didn't bail and say, screw it. They joined together and said, let's figure out how to make this work. That applies to this situation, which is we have to use a system that Donald Trump has manipulated for his own gain to get him out. And the answer is, you know what I'm going to say. We have to so overwhelm the vote that the ways Trump has fixed, and by fixed, I don't mean repaired, I mean sort of rigged the election, will not be enough to put him in the Oval Office for an additional 4 years. We have to figure out how to do that. We can use this system to remove Trump. We just really have to come out in force. And a little bit later on, we are going to talk about how 2016's non-voters are looking at this election. Very interesting. So that was night 3 of the DNC. Join me tonight for night 4, the final night of the DNC. This is really important, this next story. When there's a conclusion of sorts to a major story, it's really important to follow up on it. And this week, what some previously dismissed with this stupid term Russiagate has been confirmed as very much not a hoax. And, you know, it never gets as much attention when the report comes out because you've got to read it. The corrections never get as much attention as the headlines. We know this is a reality in media, but the Senate Select Committee has published its report about Russian meddling in the 2016 election, and it confirmed a lot. Now, I'm not expecting any apologies from the lunatics who personally attacked me and misstated what I claimed was the situation. This is not about me, but I hope that we can get into the record all of the things that were not a hoax and were very much true. And what the Senate report found is a direct continuation of where Robert Mueller's investigation arguably stopped short and didn't go far enough. We got the 5th and last volume of the report on Russia yesterday, and it shows without a doubt that there has been no vindication of Donald Trump or his campaign. Now we know, well, let me back up. We already knew from the Mueller report that Donald Trump was not exonerated on obstruction. We knew that from Mueller's report. But this report from the Senate Select Committee goes so much further. Remember, as we dive into this, this is a Senate controlled by Republicans right now. This is not some left-wing partisan perspective, although certainly Democrat Mark Warner played a big role in seeing this through. Republican Richard Burr seems to have behaved relatively morally in all of this. But even without full cooperation from the White House and whoever else, what the report uncovers is extensive, and it's just not getting the attention it deserves. Despite Paul Manafort's lies throughout the investigation, they confirmed that Paul Manafort and Konstantin Kilimnik, a Russian agent, were in daily contact during the Trump campaign. They were coordinating, period. They were communicating through encrypted technology designed to automatically erase their correspondence after it took place. Wow, that's interesting. But the real bombshell here is that Kilimnik was likely a player in the Kremlin plan to hack and leak the Hillary Clinton emails. Yes, Oleg Deripaska was connected to the hacking, but Vladimir Putin directed the way in which the hack was going to be weaponized and carried out. Yeah, this is what the report found. Putin knew and was directing at a high level. This is according to a Senate committee controlled by Republicans. Yes, Roger Stone and Julian Assange from WikiLeaks were intermediaries to all of this. So you can come back and say, but David, Trump and Putin didn't personally set anything up. I don't know who alleged that they did. Certainly not on this program. Roger Stone knew as early as August of 2016 that WikiLeaks had hacked John Podesta's emails. And when the Access Hollywood grab 'em by the you-know-what tape came out, they decided, let's dump these now because the timing is opportune. The report exposes that Trump lied in his written testimony to Robert Mueller about not remembering conversations with Roger Stone. Of course, since then, Trump has commuted the sentence of Roger Stone in Stone's conviction. So again, expectations and avoiding hyperbole. We, by that I mean reasonable people like me, said from day one, guys, this is not going to lead to Donald Trump's removal. If you're expecting the Russia probe to uncover video of Trump red-handed colluding with Putin personally, that was never going to happen because it didn't happen. If you were expecting Trump to be removed because of the investigation, that was never going to happen. But if you believe, and I think as early as April of 2017, I was saying that, but if you believe that Trump basically has a thing for Putin and other dictators, and he's just easy to manipulate, and the Trump campaign was connected to Russia through WikiLeaks in this hacking and a lot of other details, the Senate report finds that it did happen. And don't forget, Trump asked on live TV that Russia hack Hillary's emails. They did. That wasn't trivial. That actually, you don't have to look too deep. He said it publicly, and it's what happened. And Manafort was in touch with Kilimnik, and it all happened, okay? So then the question is, what now? Nothing. I mean, they're not going to be held accountable. Just put it out of your mind. The accountability would be voting Trump out in November, relegating Trump to being a one-term president who leaves after one term with a disastrous record and embarrassed. Of course, he will, because of his narcissism, find some way out of it, but who cares? It's for the good of the country. That's what we have left. Either Trump is made a one-term president or Trump is rewarded with another 4 years. That's what it is. Sunday is the 15th anniversary of the David Pakman Show. We'll be doing a one-day membership special. I hope you'll partake. Sign on to our newsletter at davidpakman.com, and Sunday afternoon you'll get an email telling you how to take advantage of this insane, possibly illegal, certainly immoral membership discount. Just grab that newsletter subscription for free at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Malcolm Riordan and Laura Cowell. Thanks to both of you, and also an extra special thank you to Richard Wilson, who's today's longtime sustaining member of the day. Richard's been a member for almost 5 years. You can join right now. There's really nothing holding you back at joinpakman.com. We have some great discussions happening on the David Pakman Show subreddit, which you can find at davidpakman.com/Reddit. Interestingly, because of what the next story is, one user, Ethan A., says it's time David does a deep dive into QAnon. And Ethan writes, at first I understood the sentiment of not wanting to give these unfounded, insane beliefs any attention. However, that can no longer be the case. And Ethan argues that because so many people are now believing and embracing the QAnon stuff, that it's time for me to deal with it. Well, Donald Trump seems to also have embraced it yesterday during a press briefing. And so we're going to talk about it today, in fact. User Katie All the Time asks, how will the U.S. deal with the anti-vaxxers refusing the vaccine when it comes out? Saying, one of my fears once a vaccine for the coronavirus comes out is that a significant minority will refuse it. Soon the anti-maskers will turn into the anti-vaxxers and refuse the vaccine. If, let's say, 30% of the U.S. population refuses to take the vaccine, how will the U.S. respond? Well, I hate to burst what is already a very bad bubble, Katie, but 40 to 50% of Americans as of right now say they will not take a coronavirus vaccine. So I don't know the answer. For coronavirus herd immunity, based on its level of contagion, we need about 70% immunity in the United States. If 3 or 4% of the country gets the virus, you've got to get immunity and builds natural immunity, if indeed that's the way it works. You need about 66% of the country to get vaccinated. If only 40% plan to, we have a real problem. I don't have an answer. Here in Massachusetts, the flu vaccine is going to be mandatory this year to attend public school. A lot of people are furious. They're saying this is opening the door to mandatory vaccination. We're going to talk about that on the bonus show, but you're completely right. And in fact, Katie, I think you are understating the problem, because it's not 30% so far that have said, I probably won't get the vaccine. It's 40 or even 50% in the polls that I've seen over the last couple of months. Ugly, ugly, ugly stuff. Join the discussion on the David Pakman Show subreddit at davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT. Let's now deal with this QAnon stuff. So we have reached a new low where Donald Trump will praise anyone, absolutely anyone, who says anything positive about him. There's this thing, I hate to even call it that, called QAnon. Some people call it Canon. Some people call it canon. Some people call it Quanon. Anyway, QAnon. QAnon is a radical right conspiracy theory. It involves a deep state plot supposed against Donald Trump. A group or a person or an entity named Q claims to have classified information about it, has made all sorts of allegations. It really hasn't been worth our time to cover, but it has slowly infected Trump rallies, and it has slowly infected Trumpism, and it has spread through Trump supporters. And it got to the point where yesterday, Donald Trump was actually asked about this during his press briefing, and Trump seems to like QAnon and almost endorse QAnon, despite claiming that he doesn't actually know anything about them. Take a look at this.
During the pandemic, the QAnon movement appears to be gaining a lot of followers. Can you talk about what you think about that and what you have to say to people who are following this movement right now?
Well, I don't know much about the movement other than I understand they like me very much, which I appreciate. But I don't know much about the movement. I have heard that it is gaining in popularity, and from what I've heard, these are people that when they watch the streets of Portland, when they watch what happened in New York City in just the last 6 or 7 months, but this was starting even 4 years ago when I came here, almost 4 years, can you believe it? These are people that don't like seeing what's going on in places like Portland and places like Chicago and New York and other cities and states. And I've heard these are people that love our country and they just don't like seeing it. So I don't know really anything about it other than they do supposedly like me, and they also would like to see problems in these areas, like especially the areas that we're talking about, go away.
I've heard these people love our country. This is really close to an endorsement of QAnon, if you can imagine something so outrageous. Then the reporter smartly follows up and says, well, you know, QAnon claims that you, Donald Trump, are saving the world from a satanic cult of pedophilia and cannibalism. Is that something that you're doing? And Trump still sort of says, hey, you know, me as a savior of the world, that sounds pretty good. Trump can't get away from anybody who says anything positive about Trump, no matter how outrageous or laced with conspiracies. Take a look.
Theory is this belief that you are secretly saving the world from this satanic cult of pedophiles and cannibals. Does that sound like something you are behind?
Well, I haven't heard that, but is that supposed to be a bad thing or a good thing? I mean, you know, if I can help save the world from problems, I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to put myself out there. And we are, actually. We're saving the world from a radical left philosophy that will destroy this country. And when this country is gone, the rest of the world would follow. The rest of the world would follow.
The president is certainly not saying that's insane and I denounce it. Okay? The president is certainly not saying anything that they say about me is false. What Trump is saying is they sound like good people. They like me. They love our country. And they say I'm saving the world from things. Well, I am saving the world from things. That doesn't sound so bad. I really hope that people understand how absolutely outrageous this is. This is similar to a president endorsing Pizzagate. This is similar to a president embracing birtherism. Trump's. Yikes. Okay, yeah. Well, birtherism, that too. I read that Jeb Bush was horrified that Donald Trump seemed to endorse Q. This is not Jeb Bush's Republican Party anymore, but Jeb Bush does bear responsibility for this being the Republican Party as of today. And I think that that's really where I want to focus our time. This is why I keep bringing up that after Donald Trump is gone, whenever it is, whether it's January or January of 2025, or as Trump recently suggested, getting a third term, January of 2029. That's a joke, by the way. The Republican Party is really going to have to figure out, what do we do with the Trumpists? If Trump loses in November, he will lose despite 60 million or 62 or 64 or 66 million people voting for him. What does the Republican Party do with those 60 plus million people who want Trump reelected? What does the country do with the 60 million people is a different question, which I don't have an answer to. But as far as the Republican Party, this is what happens when you welcome any lunatic who is willing to vote against Democrats for decades. The anti-abortionists, come on in. The homophobes, come on in. The cartoonish libertarians, come on in. The white nationalists, the conspiracy theorists, the religious nuts selling silver solution, right? Everybody come on in. Well, they're here now, and they selected Trump in the 2016 primary, and they're reaping what they've sown. And now Jeb Bush doesn't like it. Colin Powell doesn't like it. As far as Jeb Bush, if Jeb Bush is concerned about what he's hearing from Donald Trump, come out publicly and say, we have to vote for Joe Biden. Where's George W. Bush? We know George W. Bush is not endorsing Trump. He's not participating in the presidential election and is reportedly disturbed by some of the things Donald Trump has done and said. Why doesn't George W. Bush come out and say, for the sake of our country, we must all vote for Joe Biden this time around? And then lastly, on the press briefing, just as like a cherry on top, Trump still seems to think that stealth airplanes, which of course they're invisible to radar, Trump still seems to think that they're invisible to the naked eye. Take a look at this.
He said very difficult. I was asking a pilot, what do you think is better? This one, that one? Talking about Russian planes, Chinese planes. He said, well, the advantage we have is you can't see it. So when we're fighting, they can't see us. I say, that sounds like a really big advantage to me.
This is where we are today. This is where we are today. And we may have 4 more years of this. It's a real possibility. It's up to us to prevent it. We're going to have more on this on the David Pakman Show Instagram, which is David Pakman Show on Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram. Why would you follow me? I don't know. But you can see pictures and updates of my urban garden, my cukes and my zooks. I've got 8 inchers, 10 inchers, footlongs. It's crazy what's going on out there with my cukes and zooks. Follow me on Instagram at david.pakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome back to the program Thom Hartmann, who's the host of the Thom Hartmann Program and also author of the new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. Tom, as always, great to see you.
Thank you, David. The book has a foreword by Ralph Nader, too, which is the foreword is almost worth the cost of the book. It's amazing.
I've actually spoken to Ralph Nader about this issue, and many people, I mean, maybe a good place to start is, I don't know that everybody understands how far back monopolies and monopolistic behavior by firms in the United States goes. You talk about it dating all the way back to the Revolution, which may surprise some people.
Yeah, the Boston Tea Party was a revolt against a monopolistic company. The East India Company was the largest monopoly in the world at the time. They had monopolized tea in the United States, along with a lot of other things. It was illegal to manufacture fine clothing in the United States, for example. Certain types of weaponry, certain types of furniture, they all had to be manufactured in England and imported via the East India Company. And so when the Depression or Recession of 1770 hit, the East India Company petitioned the British government for basically some cash. They were stretched. And the British government said, we'll give you a refund on millions of dollars worth of tea that you've got in today's dollars that you have in inventory, because they back then they paid tax when they received the tea from India, not when they sold it. And so the East India Company got this huge multi-million-dollar tax rebate that allowed them to drop their price on tea into the United States and compete with the American smugglers, which made the American people just furious. And thus the Tea Party. And our nation was birthed in a revolt against corporate monopoly.
When we think about the different times in American history where there's been more of a focus on trust busting and going after monopolies, are there certain industries that have regularly sort of skirted the scrutiny that maybe they deserve?
Well, there are some industries that have been better at it than others, and it tends to have to do with how much political power they have, which is usually a consequence of either financial power or essential industry, banks or pharmaceutical companies, for example. But, the simple reality is that, just like cancer in the body is when one cell decides, I'm going to take over the entire body, and starts growing and growing and growing without limit, and redirecting all the resources of the body to itself until it ultimately kills the body. Monopoly is cancer within capitalism. And our bodies have an immune system that, we're constantly, every day, our bodies are producing cancerous cells and our immune system is gobbling them up. This is just a normal part of, biology. Well, similarly, we developed an immune system. I mean, capitalism is really, in its modern form, only about 300 years old. And back in the 1880s, here in the United States, we developed an immune system following on what had been done in Europe just before, to that cancer of monopoly, which was the Sherman Antitrust Act, and then later in the 1930s, the Clayton Antitrust Act, and then the 1956 Antitrust Act, or anti-monopoly law. And, it worked. It worked fairly well. But the problem was in 1982 and 1983, Ronald Reagan ordered the Justice Department, the SEC, and the Commerce Department to stop enforcing those laws. And that led to this explosion of consolidation, the mergers and acquisition mania. Those people old enough to remember it. It was a wild time. Michael Milken and, greed is good and all this stuff. And all these companies being jammed together and the workers being fired, the pension funds being stolen. Most people remember the airlines, TWA and Eastern, and, they got gutted this way. But it happened in every sector of American business. And now here, 40 years later, there is literally not one single industrial sector or major sector of the American economy left that is not dominated by 3 to 5 large companies that control 60 to 80% of the total revenue and operate functionally as a monopoly. Technically, you'd call it an oligopoly. And as a result of this, the average American family is paying about $5,000 a year more for the goods and services that they buy than they would if we didn't have a monopoly. Internet service, for example, in Europe is typically $25 to $30 a month for 1 gigabyte up and down. Here in the United States, you pay 2 to 3 times that because we've got just a handful of internet service providers now.
I wanted to ask about the 5,000 because I think that's interesting. So when you write in the book that the monopoly in the United States essentially expands or increases the amount that the average family spends on a yearly basis by $5,000. And what you're talking about there would be, well, on internet, it might be an additional $60 a month times 12. There you've got $720. What are the other areas where
cell phone services, pharmaceuticals, basically everything except cheap junk from China. And what the cheap junk from China has succeeded in doing is running out of business literally thousands of American companies. Since the 1980s, we've been losing on average 700-800 factories a year. In some cases, thousands of factories a year. We were up to losing 5,000 factories a year, after signing NAFTA. And each one of those factories represents hundreds to thousands, in some cases even tens of thousands of jobs. According to the Commerce Department, according to our official statistics, we've lost millions of jobs to this kind of monopolistic behavior. Only in this case, the monopoly has been another country, and with a little help from Walmart and their friends. So it's right across the board, David.
How has when you look at the lack of appetite to really deal with this in the United States, dating back for some time, you talked about Ronald Reagan, you've talked about it in the 18th century. Is it as simple as a sort of version of regulatory capture and a calculation from those in power that this is just not where their regulatory oversight is an area that they want to focus, or is there more to it than that?
Well, by and large, that's how it's played out. But as usual, the story is a little more complicated and a little seamier and weirder. Back in the 1960s, Milton Friedman was teaching at the University of Chicago, was at the University of Chicago, and one of his students, Robert Bork, got all inflamed about this idea, hair on fire about this idea that he had learned from Milton Friedman that we shouldn't. Traditionally, America had viewed a corporation as having multiple constituencies. A corporation had a responsibility to the community in which it operated, to not mistreat that community or pollute it, to its employees, to pay them well and serve them, to its customers, to make sure its customers weren't ripped off or burned, to the institution of the corporation itself, and to its shareholders and senior management. And Bork came along and said, all that is nonsense. You guys have complicated this way too much. It's really simple. If consumers pay less, then it's not a monopoly. And, people thought he was a crackpot in the 60s, but he persisted. He wrote a book about it. He testified to Congress. He engaged in a multi-year major lobbying campaign. And by the time Reagan tried to put him on the Supreme Court, and we discovered that he not only was a crackpot, but also a racist and a homophobe, by that time, the Supreme Court in the 1970s, in a case called GTE Sylvania, had concluded that Bork was right, and that that Reagan was right, and that we're going to set all this stuff aside, and we're only going to enforce the anti-monopoly laws based on whether prices are going up for consumers. Of course, since then, prices have gone up on consumers tremendously, but basically the enforcement was killed. So we're back right now where we were in 1900, and we're faced with a situation like the one that Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft took on.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that the coronavirus pandemic has really accelerated the consolidation of market share for the players that were already some of the biggest players. I mean, we're seeing with Amazon, Walmart, places that immediately scaled up, particularly those that use, if they're using these third-party Sprinter vans to deliver stuff, that is a sign, if you work backwards, that those are the players that are increasing market share. And I just don't know, we would need a total rethink of the economy to prevent that from naturally happening in a situation like the one we find ourselves in, right? I mean, from my perspective, what the virus exposed was that a bunch of the economy is significantly more fragile than what we like to believe on a day-to-day basis. And as soon as that became clear, those that were positioned to seize on the opportunity have done so.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why so many AIDS patients died of Kaposi sarcoma, a cancer, is because their immune system had been shut down, and so cancer could grow in the body. The reason why monopoly has now seized America and our economy is being run by a couple hundred billionaires is because Ronald Reagan stripped away our immune system. He gave us the business equivalent of AIDS, and our country is suffering terribly for it. We've got to bring back that immune system. We've got to be pushing back against the cancer of monopoly.
So what's the infrastructure that you think needs to be put in place? Is it as simple as just enforcing what is on the books, or do we actually need a new framework in which we are going to approach this issue?
Well, as is so often the case with structural problems in modern America, so much of this goes back to the Supreme Court. My last book was all about that, and or actually the book before last. And, between the court in 76 and 78, giving billionaires and corporations the right to own politicians and entire political parties and calling it free speech, combined with the GTE Sylvania case where the court re-understood explicit, monopoly laws. The anti-monopoly laws explicitly talk about these multiple constituencies and how you determine, everything. And the court just said, we're going to ignore all that and go with Robert Bork. We need legislation that includes a court stripping provision, which I write about in my Supreme Court book, that overturns that Supreme Court decision and the ones that have followed, and that re-regulates American business in a way that prevents it from being cancerous.
If you have the idea that if Joe Biden wins in November and puts somebody like Elizabeth Warren, who has spoken about the issue of monopoly as Secretary of Commerce, for example, or in some regulatory role, is it naive to think that that alone might make a difference? Like, is this just way bigger than that?
I think that America is poised on the edge of the possibility of another great renewal. It seems like roughly every 80 years we go through a crisis, and then as we come out of the crisis on the back end, we experience a renewal explosion. You had the crisis of 1770, it led to the American Revolution. You had the crisis of the Civil War and the oligarchy in the South, and that led to the Civil War, but also led to all the changes, the post-Civil War changes, very positive changes. You had the great crash of 1929, the Republican Great Depression, that led to the New Deal and all those changes. A smaller crisis, the assassination of Jack Kennedy, led to Medicare, Medicaid, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, et cetera. And I think that the crisis of the Trump presidency and this giant grifter con job the billionaires have been running on us has set the stage for a renewal. The question is, number one, can we get a Democrat elected now, or has Trump so corrupted America's electoral systems that he's going to turn us into Trumpistan? And number two, if we do get a Democratic administration, whether they will have the vision and the boldness to go ahead. If Elizabeth Warren is at the helm, or has a substantial say in it, wherever that may be and however it may play out, I'm very enthusiastic and very excited and very hopeful. If she gets marginalized and it becomes, basically a reinvention of the Clinton and Obama presidencies that were deeply in the pockets of large corporations, then I'm concerned. But that's a debate and a discussion we can have once we put our house is on fire right now. First, we have to put the fire out.
Yeah, first you put the fire out before you figure out how to fix what's been burned.
Discuss how to paint the rooms. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah, searching for that analogy, and you found it. Last thing on this. There's an entire political movement in the United States which heavily fetishizes the idea of eliminating regulation, which is hampering and restricting business, et cetera, et cetera. How much of this is going to be an uphill battle until that starts to be dealt with as well?
Well, this is where we've got a big job to do in educating the American people, because the simple fact of the matter is that there is only one force on earth that can constrain or restrain a billion-dollar corporation when it wants to pollute the water, put poison in the air, kill people with crappy products, oppress workers, and rip off their employees. There's only literally one power on earth that can fight back against that, and that's government. And, the right-wing billionaires, the Koch brothers and their buddies back in the day knew that. They understood that. And when their boy, Ronald Reagan, got elected, they, in his first inaugural address, in his, minutes after he was sworn into office, his first speech, he said, "Government is not the solution to your problem. Government is the problem." He laid he set the table for this destruction of America that's been going on for 40 years. And there's some serious repair work that needs to be done. But I think if enough people wake up and realize how badly we have been harmed by this bizarre small government ideology that was only promoted over these 40 years by people who simply wanted to be able to pollute and poison and rip off with impunity, then I think that there's some considerable hope.
The book is The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We've been speaking with the book's author, Tom Hartman. Tom, it's always so good to talk to you.
Thank you, David. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on your program.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
This next story is sort of the perfect epitome of everything that is Donald Trump. According to the former Department of Homeland Security Chief of Staff Miles Taylor, Donald Trump floated the idea of swapping Puerto Rico for Greenland in order to get rid of some of those poor Puerto Ricans from dirty Puerto Rico. Yeah, this combines like 3 or 4 different stories. So first, of course, is Trump's obvious disregard for Puerto Rico. We saw this during hurricane response in the past. You might remember Donald Trump showing up in Puerto Rico and shooting rolls of paper towels like basketballs. Then there's the idea of the S-hole country, which mostly are countries with brown people. And then there's the idea of Trump being interested in acquiring Greenland, which is something that came up. I don't know if it was 6 months ago or 12 months ago. Just time feels so strange at this point. And lastly, kind of tying it all together, is Donald Trump's completely deranged worldview, his delusions of grandeur, his narcissism, his complete lack of empathy. So let's first go to the tape. Here is Miles Taylor, former Department of Homeland Security Chief of Staff, telling the story himself on MSNBC.
Tear gas at the border, et cetera. I'm wondering, what is the most, in the conversations you were involved in, disturbing idea or thought or discussion that you heard from President Trump that is sort of resonating and sitting with you still today?
We could probably go on for days about that. Although I'm going to tell you one thing that just popped into my head, Hallie. There was a time when, of course, we were spending a lot of our days down in Puerto Rico after the hurricanes wreaked devastation down there, U.S. Virgin Islands, and other places. There was a trip that we made down there in August of 2018, and I remember before we went, the president said something, and your viewers are going to be somewhat familiar with this. The president's talked before about wanting to purchase Greenland, but one time before we went down, he told us not only did he want to purchase Greenland, he actually said he wanted to see if we could sell Puerto Rico. Could we swap Puerto Rico for Greenland? Because in his words, Puerto Rico was dirty and the people were poor. These are Americans, Hallie. And we don't talk about our fellow Americans that way.
So this is really pretty wild and completely unconscionable and really something to contend with. It has to be an anecdote for some kind of Hall of Fame, although I don't know what we would be commemorating in this Hall of Fame. It wouldn't be anything good, but it seems like that anecdote is historic in some sense. And I'm reminded of what Michelle Obama told us during her DNC speech on the first night of the Democratic National Convention Monday, which was, if you think things couldn't possibly get any worse, they can and they will if we don't make a change this election. Now, merely as a thought experiment, if Puerto Rico got to become part of Denmark the way Greenland is part of Denmark now, Puerto Ricans might actually be better off, because my guess is Denmark wouldn't do to Puerto Rico or neglect Puerto Rico in the way that Donald Trump has neglected Puerto Rico. So from the standpoint of the Puerto Rican people, it may be interesting to them to actually become part of Denmark. But of course, this is completely crazy in every sense. And it's very funny to hear the right continue to insist that Latino voters are they're on the verge. They're so close of becoming Republicans and abandoning the Democratic Party. Then you hear this, and it's very hard to fathom that that's the case. And of course, Cubans are the most conservative Latino group in the United States. Other than Cubans, there is very little Republicanism among Latino voters, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Mexicans, Argentinians, so on and so forth. And then, by the way, everybody who talked about we need a business person running the country like a business, this is what you get. This is what you get when you have someone who says, if a piece of my business isn't interesting, If a piece of my business is a loss leader, if it's not profitable or whatever, let me see if I can find some sucker to offload it to or sell it to. And that's how you get a president who says, maybe I could trade Puerto Rico for Greenland. I used the term earlier. We are reaping what we've sown. And that is exactly what you see in this story. There's a very interesting new poll from the University of Southern California, which is making headlines because Joe Biden is winning by 11. I don't want to talk about that. I've already told you, Joe up 11 with a margin of error of 3.5 means maybe Joe is only up 4. And if Trump picks up a point between now and November, you could have the exact same outcome as in 2016. So I don't care about Biden up by 11. What I care about in this poll is that it looks at non-voters from 2016, okay? In the United States, embarrassingly, tragically, disgustingly, only about 55% of eligible voters vote. 45% of those who could vote did not vote in 2016. The turnout was 55%. The preliminary data from the University of Southern California poll finds that among those who didn't vote in 2016 but plan to vote this year, 52% plan to vote for Joe Biden, while only 32% plan to vote for Donald Trump, and another 16% say that they would vote third party. Now, it's also notable that among those who voted third party in 2016, they are also leaning towards Biden. 41% of those who were third party in 2016 are going Biden, while only 30% of 2016's third party voters are going for Donald Trump. That's huge. And of the people, when you combine that, 71% of third party voters from last election are not voting third party this time around, which I think does go to the understood significance of this election. But I want to focus on the non-voters, okay? 2016 non-voters who are going to vote are leaning towards Biden. The obvious question is, how many people is that, right? If there's 100,000 non-voters from last time who are going to vote, that's very different than if there are 10 million non-voters from 2016 who plan to vote, if indeed 52% of them are going to be voting for Joe Biden. And just as importantly, how many people are there who did vote in 2016 and don't plan to this time around? No data on them. Another important question. But this is another signal that our instinct from a year and a half ago continues to be proven true. We are way better off trying to just mobilize people to vote than we are trying to argue with Trumpists to get them to change their minds. It's very clear that a majority of those who didn't vote last time, if we can get them to participate, that helps Joe Biden. Just finding non-voters from 2016 and getting them to vote helps Joe Biden. If you can target it to people who are already on the left but didn't vote, that's the win. Spending time arguing with Trumpists whose brains have turned to mayonnaise is not a good electoral strategy. And then we get to the problem of voter apathy in the United States. There is no question, when 45% of the eligible voting public doesn't vote, there's no question that part of the problem is we are not ingraining civic engagement and the importance of voting from a young age, where if people are growing up in households where, of course, you vote is the default, if kids are not hearing in school as early as whenever we vote, that is what you do. If that was the situation, our turnout would be far higher than 55%. That's one part of the problem. Our voting system is also part of the problem, and we can't ignore that. The system we have dissuades voting. And if you look at other countries without mandatory voting, with significantly higher turnout, you see that sometimes they have different election systems. New Zealand has a mixed member proportional system. Their turnout last election was almost 80%. Germany has a mixed member proportional system. Their turnout was 76%. We have a first past the post system that perpetuates the two-party duopoly and dissuades voting at all. Now, many of you have called me during live calls and you say, David, what the hell's going on with third parties? Why can't third parties get going in the United States? Part of it is the spoiler effect of the first past the post system. And part of it also is campaign finance. So there are many problems here. I don't believe that the intent of the founding fathers was to create a system that dissuades participation, but it's what it's become in the modern voting era. From the standpoint of this election, let's target those who didn't vote last time. It's a good idea. The data backs it up. We can't bank on non-voters showing up. Some of the least reliable voters are people who didn't vote last time, unfortunately. But the numbers are on our side. Arguing with Trumpists is a waste of time. And the numbers show non-voters from 2016 much more likely to support Joe Biden than Donald Trump. I think it's an interesting area to focus on, particularly in battleground states from here on out. We have a voicemail number, which is 2192 David P. Here is yet another question about 2020 and Donald Trump.
Hey, David, I have a quick question. Theoretically, Biden wins now.
Yes.
Trump spends the next 4 years building his base even more. Could he run for president again and fulfill his second term 4 years later? Can you legally do that within the Constitution, within our laws? I'm not sure.
Yes, you can. So the question is, if Trump loses now and Biden's president 4 years, could Trump run in 2024? He could. I don't think he will. I think if Trump loses, he is a narcissist. He will have to justify his loss. He can't just say, I lost. I lost because people didn't want me. I lost because I messed up. Trump will justify it and say, I didn't want it anyway. Screw you guys. I've got better things to do, etc. Trump will be nearly 80 in 2024. Trump is not going to run in 2024 if he loses. This is it. OK, this is the opportunity. We can get Trump out and that will be it for Donald Trump. Now, Don Jr. or Eric or Ivanka, who the hell knows? That's another story. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But this is it. If Trump is not president the next 4 years, that is it for Trump's presidency. We've got a great bonus show for you today. So many great stories. I hope you'll join me on the bonus show. And remember that you can get instant access to that world famous bonus show by becoming a member at joinpakman.com.